Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House, alongside, as always, Mr. Fun himself, Martin Popoff.
Morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, good, good. We had a little bit of winter overnight. Now it's just cold and no more winter, clear skies. But
Sun is shining here, but man, the wind is howling. We had a little dusting of snow last night. We had a foot of snow here the other day. I don't know what you guys got earlier in the week, but snow is on the ground once again,
yep,
and it's
yep,
chilly.
absolutely, yep.
Winter is here. So today, for this fun-filled episode, we're gonna visit this thing called hair glam metal once again. And a while back, we did an episode that kind of talked about hair metal moving into the '90s. But we figured today, because maybe a lot of people caught that episode. It was a while ago. Today, we specifically wanted to talk about like 10 our favorite 10 albums each of examples of this sort of music post 1991 and on, where kind of the formula is still going, fairly successful. Maybe the album sold, maybe they didn't. But in our eyes, these bands are still kind of keeping on, maybe adding some tweaks to their sound, but still showing that this thing we call hair metal or glam metal just didn't roll up and die completely in 1991 when grunge kind of took over. So, like I said, we've picked out 10 examples of albums that we think kind of take that formula and either do it exactly the same 1991 and post years, or maybe tweaked it a little bit, but still kind of fits into this genre. So, Martin, I don't know if you want to expand on that before we get started.
Yeah, so we've somewhat covered this idea before, but this is more of like an expansion and update. I mean, there's more examples. We're going to rank 10 this time in reverse order. So yeah, it's some of the same sort of ideas, but we're also moving it forward to say, look, 1991. This is when there was the death of it with Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all those bands doing well. Soundgarden starting to do well. Stone Temple Pilots starting to do well, that sort of thing. So we've got 10 each. You want to go two at a time
Yep, that works.
as we go?
Yep.
Okay, so my first one is Slaughter. This is kind of an interesting situation where you've got, the idea here is that um, everything seemed to be still okay in about 1990. Bands were getting signed, they were doing well. So Slaughter is late to the game with "Stick It to You" in 1990. It goes double platinum. I loved their sound. It was a very unique sound. It was very high and screechy. This sort of trademark Dana Strum kind of production thing. But what happened with them is they went in 1992. They're still going, so they're still working their label deal, right? Um, and they're on Chrysalis. They're looking hair metal, but the idea is they're looking just you bring out a little bit more of the leather and stuff, but the hair is essentially hasn't changed and the sound hasn't changed. It is a little more creative, I think. But then what happens with the life cycle is they get sort of demoted to CMC, and then they're doing this sort of thing. But I think what happens is it's a good example of a band where you know the album that they're putting out even after everything breaks, and they're starting to maybe second guess themselves a little bit, but they're sticking in their lane and they're doing this same kind of music. So it's essentially almost like a looser, more creative, more honest version of what they did on "Stick It to You," where you feel a little bit of that conservative corporate restriction to what they're doing. They're painting a little bit more, inside the lines. And then I think on the Wildlife, it just gets a little more creative. So that's my first one. My second one is quite similar also. And again, these are in reverse ranked order. So as we go up, it's like I love these albums even more and more and more, kind of thing. And so Enough's Enough is another interesting case here. So you've got the debut in '89. So another band that is late to the game, but it's when the game is doing amazing still. And then so you've got the debut. But the album that I think is considered the best is Strength. And this is almost, this is a band that's considered like a hair metal, like a cross between hair metal and Cheap Trick, or hair metal and the Beatles, the great Donny V and Chips Enough. And then they're still, so the idea is they're on Atlantic Atco, as the stuff is still doing really well. But you even get up into 1993 and they still have a label deal, albeit with Arista, and they put this one out where they're they're changing their look a little bit. There's a little bit of the hippie hair metal look, that thing that was coming in as well, right? Peace signs and the little John Lennon, Ozzy Osbourne glasses. And then this is looking a little darker, but it's more or less the same kind of
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
So they are sticking to their guns as well. So that's my first two. And again, the theme being that maybe some of these bands, even if you're late to the game, they can be even better after hair metal is ostensibly over.
Yeah, and I think one of the key points you made there is that the major labels were still signing them. I think they still had a grip on things. Probably what about 93? I think we started to see a little bit of shift, but 91 and 92, you're still seeing a lot of these bands popping up. My first choice at number 10 is a perfect example, Lynch Mob. So of course, we have the self-titled
Yeah. Yeah. I've got
album, second album from 1992. You know, you had Wicked Sensation, which came out the year before that. So that's basically George Lynch from Dokken,
Yeah.
leaving Dokken, who kind of petered out around this time. And honestly, when you listen, Dokken have always been called a hair metal band. When I listen to the music of Dokken and I listen to Lynch Mob, quite frankly, I think Lynch Mob sounds more in line with what we described this type of music is all about. So this, the second album, which didn't chart, by the way. So the first album did okay, but the second album didn't chart. So they got the look, right? He's got this guy, Robert Mason, on vocals on the second album, who is a terrific choice to do this kind of music. It's glammy, it's groovy, it's bluesy, it's basically hard rock. But the more you listen to that Lynch Mob self-titled album, you think that this is probably like 3-4 years late to the game. Because I think by 92, the tides are already starting to turn a little bit. But man, songs like Jungle of Love, Cold as the Heart, Heaven is Waiting, Tangled in the Web, No Good. I mean, these are all just fun, party, kind of bluesy, kind of sleazy, glammy songs. And they would have been perfect for like 1988, 89. So it's almost like, with the demise of Dokken, I think that George probably waited a little bit too long to get this band going, or maybe it was the perfect time, with the first album. But I think that what was cool about this is George was basically bucking the trend and saying, we're not going to, because, if you look at like the first Dokken album after the breakup, which would come a few years later in the middle of the 90s, they were basically saying, all right, we're going to incorporate grunge into our music and try something a little bit different. Maybe it didn't work. But here George is saying, you know what, we're just going to kind of continue on doing what we're doing. And we're really going to, you mentioned Slaughter before, we're just going to do what guys in Slaughter are doing and everybody else is doing. This is what has been popular for the last few years. Give him credit for that. It's a perfect representation of this style of music in the early 90s. So that's my number 10 pick.
Mm-hmm.
And my number 8 pick is the fifth album from Europe, from Sweden, and it's Prisoners in Paradise. This is a really interesting case here because here you have a band, their first two albums were more this kind of like Euro metal, Euro hard rock, almost early power metal, neoclassical metal. And then, of course, the Final Countdown comes out, which is much more commercial and melodic. That becomes a huge hit here. Title track has become this legendary song, whether you love it or hate it. And then the band, I think, with that success here in the US, they kind of move further away from that early, very kind of keyboardy, melodic, heavy rock thing that they were doing early on in their career to much, much more of, we're going to make our music, all ready and willing to this whole kind of glam metal thing that's going on here. And ironically, this is probably the most hair metal album they ever did. But weird enough, after the success of the album before it, and of course the album before that, which was the Final Countdown, this didn't even chart here in the US. So like this is 1991, maybe a little late, but as we've talked about, there are other bands who were doing pretty well in 1991 doing this type of music. But songs like All or Nothing, Halfway to Heaven, Little Bit of Lovin', I'll Cry for You was kind of pushed as a single. I mean, these are all perfect examples of this style of music. But again, maybe it was this band just kind of doing something just for the sake of being successful here in the US. Because, once they went away, which was shortly after this, they came back as a totally different beast altogether, and they never really looked back to this sound again. But if you like songs with lots of ooh, ahs in the choruses and all those kind of like, big, big, catchy, sugary, sweet choruses and harmonies, this is full of them. It's a fun album. It's a fun album. It's, not one of my favorites from Europe, but I think as a representation of this style, it's a good one. I'm just kind of shocked that it didn't do better than it did. But
yeah. Two more points about Lynch Mob. It's kind of funny how the second album is a self-titled. So
yeah.
it's almost like they're saying, okay, I guess in some form we have to start again. So
Well, they had a
they
new
are
singer, right? Yeah, so you
essentially
got to.
starting
Yeah.
again. Yeah. And it's almost like we don't want to attach like the previous title, Wicked Sensation, is kind of hair metally, right? So it's
Yeah.
like we can't put a hair metal title on it, but you know, and maybe grunge are really cutting down on the number of words. So it's like we'll just go with lynch mob kind of thing. And I always thought this was funny. That photo shoot on the back
Yeah.
of the first one is a very damn Yankee sort of photo shoot.
Yes.
Yeah. So
100%. Yeah. Got
yeah,
sitting on the motorcycles with the little mountains behind us and everything.
yeah.
Yeah. We got the sunglasses on, and of course.
Brings up a point. I mean, part of ditching hair metal is, I guess, you got to ditch the motorcycles, right? You know, the motorcycles are one of the symbols of that, and you have to get
And
rid of
to get back to your slaughter pick before, if you look at the picture on the back, they kind of look the part, but of course it's in black and white.
it.
It's
Yeah,
almost
yeah,
like they're trying to make things look a little darker, a little more
yeah,
tough guyish. We got the leather jackets on, we
yeah,
still got the long hair, we still look good, but let's do a black and white shot. We don't want to accentuate the colors. Let's move away from the poison thing, right? And let's kind of look a
yeah,
little
yeah.
1990s, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, my number 8 choice. So we are going in increasing order here, but I do love this band, Kick Tracy, No Rules. So this is an interesting one. BMG 91, totally arriving late to the game, but this is a situation where Slaughter has done well, and they really have the Slaughter sound. Steven Churro, and it's produced by Dana Strum. So as I've said before, they are the baby Slaughter in effect. But it's funny, they come back with a long EP, No Rules, and then Field Trip, and that's all they ever did. This has what, 1, 2, 3, 6 songs on it. So yeah, this is another great example of a band where I feel like there's some real creativity to it. They've got the cover of Mrs. Robinson on here. You're So Strange is a great song. Big Western Sky, amazing song on here as well. But total hair metal feel, but it just feels a little loose and dangerous and a little Who like. So that's that one. And then Tesla is an interesting case because you've got a band that has a platinum album with Mechanical Resonance, and then the Great Radio Controversy goes double platinum. Uh, and this one here, so Psychotic Supper goes platinum. But I was in between picking that and Bust a Nut, because the crazy thing about this story is that all the way up into 1994, they are still ticking along. They're still making the same kind of music. I think what saved them is they had a little bit more heart and soul and bluesiness and traditional heavy metal that little bit of the heavy Def Leppard thing going on as well. They're from, where was Sacramento, Fresno, up there somewhere. So they're kind of from a weird place in California. And they were just one of these that were allowed to live, and they extended their shelf life through just having these really good albums. I think both of these are fantastic. So yeah, 91 and 94 for the next one. So yeah, strange sort of lifespan for these guys. They arrive late, but not particularly late, but they just seem to have one of the longest lives of all of them.
Yeah, I mean, they've always been an interesting band for me. I've always loved Tesla also. And I think
Yeah.
that they were one of those bands that kind of got lumped in with a lot of the other ones we're talking about. But yet, did they ever really belong, right? They didn't like go for the whole image thing. And even their videos were mostly like kind of performance videos. They'd be up there playing, right? Their albums are kind of bluesy, they're heavy in spots. It's melodic, catchy stuff for sure. But yeah, I mean, Tesla just kind of like said, whatever that, well, that stuff is going to happen. We're just going to kind of keep on putting out the albums we tend to do, and people still kept buying them and loving them, and they never really had that kind of, until much later on. So
It's possible, Pete, that also that they saw the freight train coming, and combined with just being smart enough to realize that most of the hair metal tropes are pretty stupid. So they're just talented people, right? And it's a little bit like the Guns N' Roses thing, where they seem to be smart enough to realize that a lot of this is kind of dumb. So Tesla's moving along like just maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead of everybody else, and
yeah,
they got rewarded with that by being allowed to live, all the way up to 94 easily enough.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think another band that maybe kind of felt the same way to an extent is my number 8, and that's Cinderella. So we got
Mhm.
Still Climbing from 1994. So this is their final album, right? And this sees them continue on with that kind of shift into more bluesier party rock fare. You know, the first album is what it is. I still think first album is really, really good. But then they had the look, they had the the clothes, the hair, the whole thing, and their music is filled with power ballads and these kind of glammy anthems and whatnot. But here, by the second, especially the third album, and certainly this fourth album, you see them going further and further down that kind of blues rock way that they probably always had it in them. We know that Tom, that's kind of what he really likes. But this still was. I mean, this was not a big seller. This was their worst seller out of all. This hit number 178 here. Hit number 88 in the UK, but I mean, it still sounds like Cinderella. The voice is still there. The kind of the feel good nature of the music's still here. I mean, All Comes Down is great. Talk is Cheap is really good. Easy Come, Easy Go is another great song. Blood from a Stone. It still sounds like Cinderella, although it's Cinderella, I think, trying to be a little more serious. You notice here, no front cover, no picture of the band, nothing, right? It's all, they want themselves to be noticed for their music and music alone. So to me, I can always appreciate that. I think, like I said, it still sounds like them, but they are evolving. They're looking to move away from that. But it's like, if you like Cinderella, you like what we've done previously, it's still us, just maybe a little bit more serious. So that's my number 8. And then number 7, Martin, if you could hold up. So I picked Firehouse Hold Your Fire
Mhm.
from 1992, but this is a band very late to the
I've got
game.
3 from
He's got the third
95
album
here.
there.
Yeah.
Yep. So the second album hit number 32 on the charts. And then Reach for the Sky, When I Look Into Your Eyes, which was a big hit all over MTV, and Sleeping with You, all top 100 singles in the US for a band that the debut album didn't come till after 1990. Really good. I mean, but this band, very typical of the sound. I kind of always thought of Firehouse as a little bit heavier, like kind of Bon Jovi, so to speak. You got dual guitars, you got the sugary sweet vocals and choruses, slick production values, but man, it still latched onto an audience for those couple of years, and their videos were all over MTV. So again, I think at this time, if you had good songs that were radio friendly and you had videos that were slickly produced and accentuated the look of the band, these were good looking guys, you had some ladies in there, cars, parties, all that sort of thing. Home run, home run. But of course, by that third album and after, that was it for Firehouse. So very small shelf life here, but again, came late to the game, but still giving you all the tropes and all the things that so many people liked about this style of music. So Firehouse, Hold Your Fire, my number 7.
Yeah. And you wonder if there was even some effect of like the industry is not sure how many of these grunge bands are going to be huge. And then also that this is like easy pickings. These are just extending the shelf life of already proven brands. So we will, in some cases the major label deals are wending their way out, and there's not going to be another one, but everybody's obligated to do one more or whatever. So yeah, it's still working, it's still selling, and there's probably even some realism built into the fact that we know it's going to sell. It's not going to go double platinum this time. It may not even go platinum, but at least we're going to get a gold record out of it. We may not even pour much marketing into it because we know this music's done, but we just feel like it's an easy gold that we're still going to get out of this.
Yeah, because I mean, how many years are we talking, Martin? On the show we did last time, we talked about like 83, right? 83, 84 is when this type of music really started to pick up. So, that's a good chunk of a decade right there. So how many record labels were thinking, well, this whole thing coming out of Seattle is like hot right now, but is that really going to last when this style of music is proven to be popular for, what, 8 years or whatever, or close to 8 years. So we won't forget about it. We'll keep pushing it in the case that the grunge thing kind of dies relatively quickly, which when you really think about it, it kind of did. But then by then it was too late for this style of music. Everybody already moved on to something else, and all other things are kind of coming into play.
Yeah. All right, my number 6 choice is Bonham with the great Mad Hatter album. I've always had a lot of respect for this band. So this is a 92 album. The debut is 1989, and they're actually looking a little more hair metal on
Yeah.
that. The hair's really nice and stuff. It's funny, I never thought about this, but that looks very much like the Pantera Cowboys from Hell sort of cover, doesn't it? Hanging around. It's not exactly a bar, but you know, these guys always had some smarts. Jason Bonham is always going to bring the Led Zeppelin thing. He'd been in a number of bands already. We got the great Daniel McMaster on vocals, who sadly passed away quite a while ago. And I've always said that even an extension of this brand goes into the Jason Bonham band, where I rated this. This is 1997, and I remember, you know, doing the album rankings. I rated this my favorite album of 1997. I love it to death. So I think this is just as Zeppelin-esque, maybe even more so than Mad Hatter. You really see the evolution between these three. But you also feel a little bit of the Soundgarden and the grunge in this as well. But yeah, so a late arriving band again. There was some hype around them, but yeah, you look at how they're changing the cover art at this point. And you know, definitely the cover art has gone the way of not being hair metal. But who produced this thing? Yeah, so Daniel McMaster's still there. Also has management. Tony Platt and Bonham. Doesn't sound like a Tony Platt production particularly, but yes, just a really good quality, atmospheric, boomy, strange, creative sort of album. So that's a good version of the extension of all this. And my next example is Extreme with 3 sides to every story. So they have a self-titled debut that sells 300,000. Then they have Pornography that goes double platinum, you know, More Than Words and all that. And then this one ekes its way to gold. But the idea here, you know, you got this weird three-sided album sort of thing. The idea here is they're just trying to get even super more creative. Again, the idea is that we know this grunge music is both critically acclaimed and truly creative and heavy. But they make a very pristine, clean album. It's quite hair metal-y, but it's also quite Enough's Enoughy and Cheap Tricky and Beatlesy. And it's also very highly technical in terms of like a shred guitar album pushed down into songs with Nuno. So definitely it's completely an anti-grunge album, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely pristinely beautifully recorded and played. It's a little funk metal, which is something they initiated anyways. But yeah, again, just good to see them extend the brand, still get a gold record out of it, and still make a really good record. And as we're noticing with a lot of these, a trend through a lot of these albums is some of these albums are these bands' best albums. So yeah, they're learning from something and being really good. So
to me, that's their masterpiece right there. I mean, it gives you everything that they love about music. You know, you got the funkiness, you got the metal, the hard rock, you got the kind of power pop side, you have the artsy side, right? There's some little Queen things going on there as well. I like the way it's kind of like the 3 different sides. All 3 sides sound different from each other. It's amazing album. It's a shame that the kind of went over the head of the general public though at the time.
Yeah.
But, all right, my number 6 is Damn Yankees, Don't Tread from 1992. Second and final album from this supergroup. You know, when you look at the career of Damn Yankees, how short it was. So here you had like 3 superstars who, not surprisingly, came together, and it's almost like this band had to happen because, you know, you had Tommy Shaw from Styx, did some solo albums in the 80s, which arguably some of them you can say are kind of like pop, hair metal-y, glam metal type of thing, pretty light. Some of the Styx stuff from the mid 80s is kind of in that vein as well. You had Ted Nugent, who was experimenting with this also in the 80s. You got Jack Blades from Night Ranger. You know, Night Ranger, what are they? Kind of pop metal, pop hard rock, right? So them coming together and doing something like Damn Yankees, not all that surprising and very timely, I think. So this one didn't do quite as well as the debut. This hit number 22 on the charts. You know, High Enough was the big, huge hit off the first album. Here they had Where You Going Now, which was kind of like part 2 of that, trying to replicate that success. Didn't quite do as good, but pretty good. But man, you got like 15 Minutes of Fame, a lot of good party anthems on here. This Side of Hell, Don't Tread on Me. You got the great Nugent song Uprising at the back end of the album. I think it's a really good mix of talent. It's a catchy album. but maybe their kind of final gasp, right? I think that after this, they kind of all decided, well, maybe it was just better just to go back to the other band. So, of course, back to Styx, back to Night Ranger, putting Nugent back together and whatnot. So, maybe never destined to last all that long, but still, I think a good representation of this style of music and pretty damn good album. And number 5, I'm going to go with White Lion Main Attraction from 1991. There we go. So their 4th album, this one hit number 61 on the Billboard charts, made it to number 31 in the UK. I mean, this has got loads of, I think to me, White Lion were always kind of like, they kind of took that early 80s Van Halen kind of blueprint, but made it a lot more glammy, right? So you got this guitar player who's plays almost kind of like Eddie. You got this charismatic, dirty blonde front man. You got the great rhythm section. I mean, Lights and Thunder is just terrific. Big guitars on there. They remake Broken Heart from their first album. For those maybe who didn't hear the first album, because it was only available as an import initially. I got War Song, Till Death Do Us Part, Leave Me Alone, Love Don't Come Easy, more of like a ballad. I think Mike Tramp's vocals were always perfect for this style of music. Like I said, you got the flashy guitar. That's kind of whole part of this scene. But this would be their last album for quite a while. They would kind of break up and come back, and then they had one final album and then just called it a day completely. And man, Vito Bratta just disappeared from the scene altogether. So it's almost like they made their money. He got tired of the whole music industry, and just that was that. But yeah, good album though, nonetheless. I think it's maybe like their final last gasp. I think it was a pretty good one in their catalog.
Yeah. That's funny. Just the same way we discuss Overkill being an East Coast band, being my favorite thrash band that I get a lot out of these days. White Lion is almost my favorite of the hair bands that I could go back to, because there's a lot of depth and maturity in this band, right?
Yeah, I think that it's really good songwriting and the playing is really good. I mean, I've always thought that Vito Bratta was a terrific guitar player. Mike is a great singer. And yeah, I mean, they're always known for their kind of like their big ballads, but I think they had a lot of just good hard rock songs, and just well done productions. And yeah, I agree with. I think this band always deserves better when you kind of looking back on this time period. I think they were one of the shining stars. I remember seeing them before they even got signed to the major label here in the States and thinking, wow, this band is terrific. And then all of a sudden they were like, breaking out all over the place about a year later. So good band.
Yeah. And Mike Tramp, so prolific as a songwriter. He's
Yeah.
almost like he's completely proven himself that he was in it for the right reasons, just by making so many great albums moving forward, kind of thing. Like, he loves music, right? He loves
Yeah.
making music, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. So my next choice is Kiss with Revenge. I've talked about this album a lot, that I really liked it. It's a 1992 album. I mean, they're not looking particularly hair metal. Well, that is fairly hair metal. The long black coats is definitely hair metal, and the hair looks great. But the music it's totally a hair metal album. It's even though Bob Ezrin produces, it's no Pink Floyd, The Wall, or Elder, or Destroyer. It's very hair metally. The interesting thing about Kiss, though, which is kind of funny, I just noticed this. I mean, the previous album is 1989, so it's outside of the purview of what we're talking about here, but they were already toning back the keyboards. And the funny thing about that album that I noticed, it's 59 minutes long for an album in 1989, and CDs haven't even become really, pervasive yet at that point. To me, I always think of the start of the CD year being 1990. That's when you really started seeing it pushed. So here they are making a CD length album still in the LP years, which is kind of visionary of them. Like, it's weird that it's their longest album, apparently,
Yeah,
of
for a
all of
Kiss
their
album. Yeah,
15
sure.
songs. Yeah, but they're already see, even they're visionary there too. They're already even on that record starting to see that freight train coming down the road, or the tracks, and saying that we have to make a better album. But here they really make a better album. This is probably the best in many years, maybe going all the way back to the 70s. I always rate this super high. And my next one is Love Hate Let's Rumble. I talk about this band a lot. I think they're absolute geniuses at what they do. You know, I don't want to overstress the word genius, but I think this is a great, great album that they put out after Wasted in America. More on that later. But Let's Rumble is 93, but already, you know, they've got this weird artwork on it. And you know, they're down to kind of like a weird RCA BMG deal. It's very combative, not a lot of songs on it, but it still kind of fits that hair metal thing, although it's really getting into the sleaze hair metal thing. It's again, they're like a Guns N' Roses. I think they're a better Guns N' Roses. But so that's my number third favorite of my 10 ranked. So there you go.
Cool. All right. My number 4 is Mr. Big, Lean Into It from 1991, their second album. Yes. And their biggest album. I mean, this one hit number 15 on the album charts. And man, To Be With You, a #1 hit single. Kind of crazy for 1991 that something like this is like just busting up the charts. There they go. They look great. You know, you got Paul Gilbert coming from those Shredders, Racer X. You got Billy Sheehan from, of course, David Lee Roth and Tallis. You got Derek Martin. You got Pat Torpey. So kind of like a cool little super group there. But I think this band really wanted to show that you can make commercial music like this, but still have a lot of great musicality, right? Because you got Sheehan and Gilbert in this band who are just always doing some blazing shredding, but let's make some really, really catchy, accessible kind of glammy songs. I mean, you got Green Tinted 60s Mind, which was kind of like a fun take on like the early British glam metal scene. It's kind of poppy, it's kind of psychedelic, right? Kind of hippies type of thing. Very, very cool song. Like I mentioned, you had To Be With You, which kind of like the More Than Words thing. I think that, you know, More Than Words did a ton for the career of Extreme, even though very unlike everything else on that album on Porno Graffiti. Same thing with here, you know, To Be With You, not really like the rest of the stuff on this album, but again, it helped push this album into to the top of the charts. Daddy, Brother, Lover, and Your Little Boy, great rocker on here. Alive and Kickin', Road to Ruin, Voodoo Kiss. It's a banger of an album, really. Great guitar licks, great bass playing. Eric's singing is just fantastic, but it's all really kind of catchy and slick and well, it's a little bit bluesy. I think some of these bands going into the 90s, they figure we add a little bit of bluesiness to our music that can only help us going forward, and maybe kind of move away from that kind of LA gloss, right, from the couple of years before. So yeah, really good album. Mr. Big, Lean Into It. And then number 3, Skid Row, Slave to the Grind from 1991. So big album, you know, not the big blockbuster that the debut was, but still double platinum, platinum and gold in many other territories around the world. Taking the same formula, maybe a little less slick, a little heavier. A lot of singles released on this album: Wasted Time, Monkey Business, the title track, The Threat, Quicksand Jesus, in a Darkened Room. All really, really strong songs. This band was all over MTV. They had plenty of radio play. And again, this album showed that you could take that kind of accessible hard rock, glam rock, hair metal sound and make it even heavier, but still keep it catchy and keep people's interest. And again, what do? You get the record label to release a lot of singles and you pump out the videos on MTV. And it totally worked for this band. So, you know, those first 2 albums, you know, great additions to anybody's catalog who's looking to, you know, kind of get into this style of music. And then on their next album, they would even start changing things up a little bit. And before you know it, the cracks start to show with this lineup and they kind of go their separate ways. But yeah, Slave to the Grind, number 3.
Yeah, so Skid Row, Mr. Big, Slaughter, what was the other one? Warrant as well. They all proved that you could be very late to the game
Yeah.
and still have some success. So as they arrive late to the game, I suppose having their debuts at the end of the 80s or whatever gives them at least the label and the fan base are not tired of them because they have 4 albums all through the 80s sort of thing. So there's still some excitement and some freshness there, and so they do have a shelf life and a life cycle that at least goes 2 or 3 years when it's not supposed to. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point because you got the Motley Crues, the Poisons, the Rats of the world who were kind of maybe struggling a little bit. Even Cinderella, you could really kind of put in there as well with the album I spoke about before, not really putting much of a dent in the charts. Here you have all these fresh bands that are coming out doing a similar thing, and they're selling boatloads of albums and, you know, doing well on the tours, and everybody's watching the videos. So yeah, yeah, there was no carryover for them at all.
Yeah. Okay, so my last two, my first one is Jackal with Cut the Crap. So this is my second favorite of this late period hair metal thing. And what I love about this one is it's incredibly late. This is 1997. And it just sounds like old Jackal, just better. I think this is by far their best album. Love it to death. Play it all the time. It's got the Brian Johnson co-vocal on it. And the funny thing about this band, even more so, is they arrive in '92. It's like completely late. They've got a band name that's spelt funny, and they're on Epic '92. They goes platinum. And the second album, actually, there's the debut. But the second album, push comes to shove. So already you're starting to change the graphics a little. It's got the brown. It's looking a little more Black Crowsy. There,
Yeah.
it's not as, this is illustration with the dogs and stuff. And this was a little bluesier of an album, but even it went gold. There you go in the back. That's a classic standard way of doing photography in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
That kind of look, right?
Yeah.
The lighting and everything. So yeah, I like having this one as the second choice out of all of them, because I just love that album to death, and I love the fact that it's 97 and they keep going. They've more albums, but this is, I think, their peak, which is really bizarre to have that happen. An Atlanta band. And as much as you don't want to call them a hair metal band, they really looked the part and they played the part and everything. Sure, it was a little more, they had the Southern rock shtick to them or whatever, but no, hair metal band, but a great band. Love them to death. And my number one is Wasted in America by Love Hate. I think this is an absolute masterpiece, a work of genius. 1992 Sony. I know I've talked about it a million times. I even love that band shot on the back. I think that's just one of the coolest looking pictures of a band you could ever have. Yeah, the artwork by I guess it's Johnny, right? Is it Johnny Love? Anyway, somebody in one of the guys in the band does the artwork for the band. Amazingly recorded, progressive, heavy as hell, really sleazy, interesting lyrics, a bit political, even a lot of variety, just start to finish, just action-packed sort of album. So that's my favorite, probably my favorite hair metal album, period, but my favorite post 91 hair metal album, so 92. So as we've seen, they go from there to Let's Rumble, and they got Let's Eat and a couple others in there. And it just, the labels get smaller and the albums get less good, kind of thing. But that second one is amazing. There's obviously the debut as well before that, which is really good. So yeah, that's my number two and my number one.
That's a really hot album, and I think I love the guitar work on that album. It's so kind of intricate and funky and metallic. To me, that band, especially that album, and I gotta thank Martin for turning me onto that album, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. To me, that's like this weird kind of extension of, if like Guns N' Roses and Extreme, circa Porn and Graffiti, kind of had a baby. That's that album sort
Yeah.
of. And it's just fun and it's groovy and just, yeah, it's just so different. It's amazing to think that something like that didn't really catch on, on a mass scale.
Yeah, that brings up, I mean, there could be even a whole show on this, and maybe we've talked about this before, but just sometimes you just get mad at the industry for just not recognizing greatness in whatever field it happens to be in, right? And we want the industry to reward greatness like King's X or whatever, but we even want the industry to reward greatness like I don't know, Mr. Bungle or Opeth or something, or Mastodon. And to an extent it does. These things become critically acclaimed and stuff, but in an ideal world you would hope that that Opeth and King's X and Mastodon could be 5 or 6 times platinum, because people just go, wow, this is good. It's they're making art that I don't understand and I'm not into, but I'm gonna, millions of people will buy it because it's great art, right? Just for that reason, right? So yeah, it's a kind of a weird concept, but I feel that about this. But this is utilitarian music, right? So is King's X, right? It's like, and you get bitter, right? You get bitter and you understand why the band is bitter, right? It's like, I sometimes wonder what goes through Doug Pinnick's head, going like, he won't come out and say it because he's too modest and he's too, properly grounded. But a guy like that should be thinking, I'm like the greatest musician on earth,
What
and
do
I
I
haven't
have to
been
do?
rewarded. Yeah,
Yeah,
what do
what
I
do I
have
have
to
to?
do?
Yeah,
Like, how can I make a better album than Dogman or Gretchen or whatever? How can I make better smash hits than this? It can't be done. It's like, and the music's there, but as we've talked about many times, you have to have a dozen ducks in a row to make it all happen, right?
yeah. There's the mainstream audience, and then there's us. And the same thing doesn't appeal to both, unfortunately. That's just the way it is. So you have, that 15% of the society who recognizes the brilliance of a band like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody else is kind of like, who? What? Why would I like that type of thing? It's this is the way it's always going to be. And there's nothing we can do to change that, unfortunately. And it sucks for the artist, right? Because they're the ones who could really use that exposure and that acceptance. And I'm sure they appreciate that small number who really understands what they're doing. I hear it all the time from bands. We review stuff and talk about it, and then they contact you like, oh, I'm really happy that you get it. Not many people do. And it's like it's sad when you hear that, right?
Yeah.
And whose fault is that? It's not really the artist's fault, right? They're doing what they want to do. That's their creativity. Is it a record label? Is it the media? Or is it just that style of music is just for a certain small portion of the music loving society? I don't know.
Here's an
It's
interesting point related to this is like when you think of many of the albums we just talked about, you might say that there's music here that is so good that why didn't it save hair metal? Like, in a sense, you could say, wow, there's a whole bunch of these great albums. This hair metal might be able to fight back by changing a little bit and live for another 10 years. Didn't happen, but you've got two more picks though, right?
Yeah, I do, but that's a great point though, because like how many people who jumped off of this bandwagon, I'm talking fans,
Yeah.
jumped off it because they were tired of the kind of sleazy cliche videos, and they were tired of the power ballads, and figured that all these bands going into the 90s were just going to continue doing that, but maybe didn't listen to some of these albums, not all of
Yeah.
them, but some of them, because they thought it was just continuing on with that. But yet some of these bands that we talked about got more serious and did things a little bit differently, but nobody bought the records, right? Is that
Yeah.
because so many fans wanted something completely different? And that's why Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and so on and so forth grabbed people, because it was so drastically different. It was still kind of heavy, kind of rocking, but I don't want all that long hair, and I don't want all the this, that, and the other thing anymore. I don't know.
But it's funny. I guess to extend the point, it's like you almost think, okay, if this album would have been absolutely pushed and people realized what great art it was or whatever, what if all of a sudden another dozen bands like Love Hate came out, right?
Yeah.
Or like Guns N' Roses came out at this time. It's almost like, whoa, it's back. Here it comes. A new army's coming in. They're slightly different. And then all of a sudden, like I say, it stamps down grunge. Like all of a sudden, there's a pile of these bands that it's like, whoa, hang on. It ain't over yet. We've adapted. We've gone to the gym. We've built ourselves up and we're coming back for the fight. And maybe it would have stamped down grunge and it would have kept going, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Even like the rise of a band like Dream Theater in 92, right? Even though they spawned a lot of imitators that didn't quite catch on, because that was like that was I wouldn't say an extension of this, but that was like, let's take heavy music, and instead of making it really commercial and really kind of, we don't want anthems, we want the musicality to go up to 11, and we're going to bring back some things from the 70s and the early 80s and do something a little bit different. And there's a lot of fans for that, but not on a mass scale. We're
You're
talking.
right. If Dream Theater would have gone diamond, we might have been sitting here talking about how heavy metal went prog at that age. Like the entire, main relevant chunk of heavy metal just turned over here. And forget about thrash and death metal and black metal. We would have been talking about 50 huge bands that sounded like Dream Theater, right?
Yeah. And here we can just continue on here. And if that did happen, how about all those extreme bands, the death metal bands and whatnot, who were starting to incorporate bits of technicality, Morbid Angel and Death, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. Maybe they would have kind of taken that even further. So there's this kind of like meeting of the minds there,
Yeah.
right? And would that have changed extreme metal even going forward? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, all right, my number two pick is Winger Pull. That one right there.
Yeah.
Okay, their third album. So I think with Winger, another one of those bands that people kind of like Europe with the Final Countdown, people remember that 17 song and that video, right? And they're like, ah, kind of kind of a gross song. Why did they do that? It's so teenagey and all that kind of stuff. And I think that Winger, quite frankly, were running away from that throughout the rest of their career because, their music to me was always a lot more serious than what that portrayed as their first big kind of song. This album is pretty heavy. It's pretty moody, but it's still got those catchy harmonies that this band always delivered. It's got those glorious guitars. This one hit number 83 on the chart, so of course didn't do as well as these two albums, right? Or these two albums right here. But Down Incognito made it to number 15 on the rock singles charts. You have other songs like Blind Revolution Man is really good. Spell I'm Under is moody, kind of bluesy. You got Junkyard Dog is on here again, kind of bluesy, kind of funky. No Man's Ritual. No Man's Land, like a ritual. Yeah, I think that this is proof that a band could kind of take a more serious approach to this. They still sound like themselves. They still have all the trademarks. You got Kip's great vocals, loads and loads of guitars on here. But it's just a more serious version of Winger as they're going into the 90s. And you have to wonder, because of course this is 93, so grunge is already big at this time. I think that what Winger did is I think we can incorporate this more serious style of music that everybody seems to like, but we're not going to try and sound like a grunge band as opposed to like Dokken, who I think wanted to just become grunge. This isn't a grunge album. It's just a more serious take on the style of music that they were already doing. I think it's very, very successful. Arguably, in my opinion, their best album. And number one, a band I always kind of hate to include in this discussion, but you just kind of have to. And to me, this is my favorite of all these albums. That's why it's number one, is Voodoo Highway by Badlands. I think Badlands are terrific. They had the look, Martin. They had a fun nature to their music, but they always seem to really embrace the hard rock bands of the 70s and the early 80s. You got this guy, Ray Gillen, who's rock star in waiting, which unfortunately that never happened. You got Jakey Lee, who comes from Ozzy, right? Ozzy was kind of going through a kind of like glammy period while Jake was in the band for Bark at the Moon and onwards. You got a great rhythm section. Songs like The Last Time, Show Me the Way, Shine On is terrific. 3 Day Funk, Silver Horses, great choruses, great guitar work. Now here we're wearing jeans and wearing cowboy hats and looking a little more rustic. I think kind of the same approach that Cinderella was taking at the time, really. But man, just such a great sound, a really great album. It may not be as accessible as the debut, but I think it's darker and bluesier. And, it's a shame that this band imploded because I think they could have kind of taken this style even further into the 90s had, all sorts of situations not happened. But yeah, a great band that I think doesn't get recognized enough. And again, another one really late to the game. That debut was right at the end of the 80s. I'm just surprised with the pedigree from being an Ozzy's band that didn't drive Badlands to bigger things. But I think most of us who know and appreciate this band love these two albums and even the unreleased third album, which I think is really good too. But yeah, Badlands, Voodoo Highway. I know you would have put this pretty high up on your list too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we wanted to. Yeah, we should let people know that we wanted to make sure our list didn't overlap at all. So part of the challenge was come up with 10 that didn't overlap. But an interesting thing that you notice as well, that possibly was another nail in the coffin of the hair metal thing, was the assembled bands of people scrounging around and auditioning and doing this and getting into this band and that band. So you've actually got Winger, Mr. Big, and Badlands are somewhat assembled bands. It doesn't feel like these are kids that grew up together and they were a gang and one for all.
That's a good point.
All that stuff, right? And that starts even back with David Lee Roth. His whole thing always felt like an assembled band situation, right? And obviously that leads into Mr. Big, but yeah, it's so but maybe there's and it sounds like the assembled band thing essentially happens late in the life cycle of hair metal because um, it's doing so well. So the labels are going, come on, guys, get together. Let's put this one with this one. We have to pump out some products, sort of thing. And so you don't really think of that when something's new and fresh and exciting and naive on any level, but you do think of it later. It's like a business. So we've got this guy, he ain't working right now. We know he's a virtuoso. We know he's a nice guy. We can work with him. He's not crazy. So they're saying, okay, let's get you, why don't you write some songs with this guy? And the outside songwriters are part of this assembled thing as well. So you got the 4 guys in the band could be assembled, and then you got 2 extra assemblages that come along. So all of this bothered people eventually too, right? It looked like too much of a business, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, Badlands and Damn Yankees, 2 albums, just a
Oh
couple
yeah,
of
yeah,
years, right? And I mean, Mr. Big lasted probably longer than any of them, although they had their stops and starts along the way, right, too. And now they're, doing their farewell tour. But yeah, I don't think any of the shelf life of any of these kind of assembled supergroups was ever going to last all that long. That might be worth doing some research, like how many of them actually did last longer than a couple albums. Not many of them at
yeah,
all.
yeah. Yeah, some quick honorable mentions. I mean, Motley Crue continues on and does some good work. I happen to like Generation Swine even, but everybody likes kind of the Motley Crue album with John Corabi. Rat continues on. L.A. Guns, I've always had an affinity for the Vicious Circle album. Guns N' Roses is a great example. They hit it massive in '91 with the 2 Use Your Illusion albums. So they continue on with Life, Saigon Kick, The Lizard. War Babies, the Brad Sinsel, the great project, post TKO project that he put together, which is just good, tough, bluesy hair metal. And Bullet Boys, Freak Show and Zaza. I always had a fondness for that band, period. But those later albums for sure with Bullet Boys as well. So
Yeah, yeah, on my side. So, again, whether you want to kind of count Ozzy here or not, but there's no denying that No More Tears, has some moments, right? I think Ozzy, I think during that kind of like 5-year period, late 80s into the early 90s, I mean, he kind of embraced this whole scene as well, arguably coming at it from a different angle, right? No More Tears was a really big album. Bon Jovi, Keep the Faith was another enormous album for Bon Jovi, one of the leaders of this whole hair metal thing. Whether you like it or not, I'm personally not a fan of the album, but Adrenalized by Def Leppard was still fairly successful, took their kind of formula, kept going on that direction. And we talked about Dokken earlier, so Dysfunctional. That's a example of a band that's like, well, let's come back and let's embrace what everybody has been so gaga over the last couple of years, and embracing that whole grunge thing and doing a really weird album for Dokken. It's not a terrible album though. It's just very different for them, and it's maybe not all that original. But they were like, shit, we're going to go and do this and see how it works before then moving back into normal Dokken style music later on. So, yeah.
great.
All right, Martin, what's going on? You got a book to talk about, don't you? And
Yeah, new book a couple days ago, the Robert Plant Pictures at 11, album by album. It's one of these panel books I'm doing, so it's actually got a color section as well in there, photos, but black and white memorabilia stuff. But essentially, it's a big Q&A panel book. I've done about 10 of these. And for Weimer, we did the Cure one, the Blue Oyster Cult. So yeah, this one, there's more coming. Pete's going to be involved as well. But yeah, and then this is kind of an offshoot from what I was doing for Voyager as well. But yeah, every single Robert Plant studio album, big long book, 282 pages, martinpopoff.com for that. We get the Perfect Water Imaginos book. But yeah, PayPal buttons and everything. Sign them, send them out. The audio podcast as well. If people want to check in, I'm up to 242 episodes of that. History in 5 songs with Martin Popoff. And then we've got the Contrarians video channel, and we're going to be back in the saddle with our album cover shows every Wednesday coming up. But yeah, we just had a nice Queen one going up as well. Dark Horse review.
yeah, those were fun. Do you have any special plans for podcast episode number 250 that's coming up soon?
No, and and I can't remember if I did anything for two. It just feels like even 100 was just yesterday kind of thing. And I think I did a Q&A or something for that. But yeah, Should think of something, but yeah, it's tough, man. It is. We've had the idea coming up with show, right, where we talked about that in our Q&As and stuff, and how yeah, ideas for all these different shows. It's and there's a lot of overlap, and then yeah, you want to do this, but you know you don't want it to overlap too much, and then yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, we'll come up with something.
I don't think people really understand how tough content creation is on a regular basis, especially when you're doing multiple shows weekly, daily. It's hard. You know, you can't hit a home run all the time, but we try our best, right? So, all right, what do we got coming up here? We got Ken Golden and the Professor's Picks coming up this afternoon, as always, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've got the debut of a new show on the channel tomorrow. So this is the first ever show in 10 years that I will not be a part of. Go figure, right? So this is the Review Crew, named after that great Motorhead song, The Road Crew. We are the Road Crew, right? So the Review Crew is being led by Jamie Laszlo and George Lamy, with a rotating cast of SOT personalities. It'll be like an hour-long review show. Everybody's going to bring one or two brand new releases that they're going to talk about in the first episode. In addition to those two guys, you also have Stephen Reed, David Gallagher, and Rick Labonte. So that is debuting, I believe, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday, and that'll be every other week. Okay, so that'll be a fun show, and though I may pop in from time to time on those, but for the most part, they will be without me to kind of give other folks on the channel a chance to review new albums, give me a little bit of a break. So we've kind of folded in the Curse of the Collector and It's All About the Fuzz into that show. So you can expect to see all the Curse folks and Karen La Preziosa from All About the Fuzz appearing on that show pretty regularly. You might see Martin on there. We were talking to Guitar Hack last night. You might see him on there. You might see Ryan Scow, and all sorts of people across the channel might be showing up to review some new albums from time to time on that. So that'll be something to check into regularly. And then Sunday, we'll be ranking the albums of the great sax legend Michael Brecker, and Mike Antonelli is joining me for that. So that's coming up on Sunday. And then Martin mentioned album covers. We're doing a fun show on the Hudson Valley Squares on Monday. We're going to be talking about those album covers that the first time we saw them completely blew us away. And then when we listened to the music lived up to that feeling we got when we saw the album. So that doesn't always happen, but we're trying to pick 5 each that really just like wowed us. And then we put the needle down on the record or spun the CD and we're like, holy cow, this is as good as that album cover is. So that's coming up on Monday. Till then, visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together. All the damn time. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. See you next Friday here at the Fun House. Have a good weekend, everybody. Take care.